Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, colleagues. A warm welcome to this bright and sunny Monday afternoon. Afternoon. How are you doing? Yaki, is everyone present? That should we start, or should we give the webinar a few more minutes?
Good afternoon, everybody. Delia, I think I'm here. I did see Tina and Lebo as well, if they can just confirm, but I think all your speakers are here.
Great. Is Tina also speaking? Is Tina also going to speak?
Hello, just if you have time.
Okay, thank you, Tina. Right. So I think let's begin. As I say, a hearty welcome everyone this afternoon. Yes, welcome to the Gender-Based Violence Amendment Act webinar series. And this afternoon's topic is accountability is not an option. So we do have a panel this afternoon, but I think I will give their introduction when they share their portion. So I think maybe Yaki, you want to start for us?
Well, thank you very much. Luando, if you can just stop sharing so I can share. I have a PowerPoint presentation. Thank you. Just give me a minute. Thank you. Is it up?
It is, Yaki.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. We are talking again today on the 3 Gender-Based Violence Amendment Acts, dealing with accountability is not an option in understanding the duty to report gender-based violence. Now, we all know the high price of gender-based violence in South Africa, and the fact that we see this daily in the newspapers and hear about it daily on the news reports and see it in our courts. Now, there's various definitions of gender-based violence, but in generally, it's broadly defined as the term used to capture violence that occurs as a result of the normative role expectations associated with each gender, along with the unequal power relationships between genders within the context of a specific society. And in this regard, it is always good for us to just remind ourselves of the basic human rights that are there in the Bill of Rights in the Constitution. Starting with the right to equality, it includes equal benefit and protection of the law. The right to dignity, the right to life, and also in particular, the right to freedom and security of person, which includes the right to be free from all forms of violence, be that from a public or private source, as well as bodily and psychological integrity, security, and control over a person's own body. Other rights to just be reminded of is relating to the right to be free from slavery, servitude, and forced labor, privacy, freedom of religion, belief, and opinion, freedom of expression, and then, of course, the rights of children, where the best interest of the child must be regarded as being paramount in any proceedings impacting on children. Now, the Constitutional Court in 2018, in particular in the case of Liebenstein and others, had explained that the systemic sexual exploitation of women and children depends on secrecy, fear, and shame. And this very much applied to gender-based violence in general as well. Survivors are stifled by the fear of the abusers and the possible responses from their communities if they disclose that they had been sexually assaulted. And this is exacerbated by the fact that the sexual perpetrator is in a position of authority and power over them. And they are threatened and shamed into silence. These characteristics often make it feel and seem impossible for victims to report what had happened to friends and loved ones, let alone state officials. And then there is the impact of self-blame, which essentially disables a victim from appreciating that the crime has been committed against her for which the perpetrator and not she is responsible. The reason I'm referring to this is because it impacts on the ability of, in particular, vulnerable persons to report. We also need to take cognizance of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, in particular Articles 27, 28, and 29, in terms of which it explains that as much as we have all got rights, we also all have got duties and obligations towards our families and society, the state and other recognized communities, and that we have to exercise our rights with due regard to the rights of others, collective security, morality, and common interest. We also all have the right to respect and consider our fellow beings without discrimination, and to maintain relations aimed at promoting, safeguarding, and reinforcing mutual respect and tolerance. It is important for us to understand that there is obligations on all of us, and that also links back up to the importance of when somebody, due to fear and other factors, are not in a position to report what had been happening to them. If we know about it, in terms of certain of the provisions in the different legislation, there is a duty on all of us to report such knowledge. Now, until the 30th of July, before the amendments to the Criminal Law, Sexual Offences and Related Matters Amendment Act of 2007 came in operation, there had been an obligation to report the commission of sexual offences. But this obligation was limited to sexual offences against children or persons who are mentally disabled, where if you had knowledge of a sexual offence committed against a child, you must report such knowledge to a police official. And if you had knowledge, reasonable belief, or suspicion that a sexual offence had been committed against a person who's mentally disabled, then you must report such knowledge, reasonable belief, or suspicion immediately to a police official. And failure to do so is actually an offence. And as long as you report in good faith, then you're not held liable in any civil or criminal proceedings by reason of making the report. This provision in the Criminal Law, Sexual Offences and Related Matters Amendment Act had been changed. It has been substituted with a new provision that is commenced on the 31st of July, 2022. That there is now an obligation on all of us to report the commission of sexual offences against persons who are vulnerable, which is a much wider category, which we'll look at just now. The provision states that if you have knowledge, reasonable belief, or a suspicion that a sexual offense has been committed against a person who is vulnerable, as defined in Section 40 of the Act, then you must report such knowledge, reasonable belief, or suspicion immediately to a police official. If you knew and you failed to report, then it is actually a criminal offense. And again, if you report it in good faith, then you cannot be held liable in any civil or criminal proceedings by reason of making that report. So this is the new legal position as from the 31st of July in respect of sexual offenses committed against persons who is vulnerable. Who is vulnerable persons? The definition in Section 40 that came in operation on the 31st of July as well explains that a person who is vulnerable includes a child or a person with a mental disability, a female under the age of 25 who is receiving tuition at a higher education college, institution, or university college, or vocational training at any training institute, or lives in a building, structure, or facility used primarily as a resident of such students. It also includes a person who is being cared for or sheltered in a facility that provides services to victims of crime. Persons who are vulnerable also now includes a person with a physical, intellectual, or sensory disability who lives who receives community-based care and support services other than from a family member, or lives in a building, structure, or facility used primarily as a resident for such persons, or cared for in a facility providing 24-hour care to persons with such disabilities. It further includes a person who is 60 years of age or older and who receives community-based care and support services other than from a family member, lives in a building, structure, or facility used primarily as a residence, or is cared for in a facility providing 24-hour care to such persons. So, if you have knowledge of a sexual offense being perpetrated against a person who is vulnerable or a reasonable suspicion, you are obliged in terms of Section 54 to report such knowledge to a police official. There is a definition of sexual offenses as well that relates to which offenses we're talking about. Now, up until the 31st of July, this would have been any sexual offense, either in terms of the common law or in terms of the criminal and related matters, Criminal Law, Sexual Offences and Related Matters Amendment Act. Offense in terms of the Prevention and Combating of Trafficking in Persons Act, which was committed for sexual purposes, and the contraventions in terms of Section 24 capital B of the Forms and Publications Act that dealt with child pornography that had been committed against a person between the period of 16 June 2003 and the date of commencement being the 31st of July. It also now, as from the date of commencement, the 31st of July, means any offense referred to in chapters in sections 3 to 10, 12, and 26 to 55 of the Sexual Offences and Related Matters Amendment Act. This will include your rape, your sexual violations, incest, child pornography, grooming, the so-called statutory rapes, as well as the sexual offenses, including grooming and pornography against a person with an intellectual disability. It includes still the offenses committed in terms of the Prevention and Combating of Trafficking in Persons Act, which was committed for sexual purposes. This provision still refers to the contravention in terms of Section 24, capital B of the Formal Publications Act. However, this was repealed as from the 1st of December 2021 by the Cybercrime Act, and it's been replaced with possession of pornography and creation of pornography, child pornography specifically, in terms of the Sexual Offences Act. So any of these kind of sexual offences that you are aware of committed against a person that is vulnerable, who's not able to report, the duty is on us to report. Note that there's also had been in the Children's Act of 2005 a duty to report abuse or neglected children and children in need of care and protection. In terms of Section 110 of the Children's Act, this duty is on specific professional persons, correctional official, dentist, homeopath, immigration official, labor inspector, legal practitioners, medical practitioners, a midwife, a minister of religion, nurse, occupational therapist, physiotherapist, psychologist, religious leader, social service professional, social workers, speech therapists, teachers, traditional health practitioners, traditional leaders, or a member of staff or volunteer worker at a partial care facility, drop-in center, or child and youth care center, if they on reasonable grounds concludes that a child has been abused in a manner that's causing physical injury, sexually abused, or deliberately neglected, then they must report this in the prescribed form to a designated child protection organization, Provincial Department of Social Development, or a police official. Also, if you on reasonable ground believe that a child is in need of care and protection, then such belief must be reported to the Provincial Department of Social Development, a designated child protection organization, or a police official. You must substantiate your conclusion or your belief, in other words, explain why. And as long as you make it in good faith, your report, you will not be liable. And again, with reference to the offences, failure to do so is indeed an offence as well. The Constitutional Court in 2000 already mentioned the fact that domestic violence, in its hidden repetitive character and its immeasurable ripple effects on our society, and in particular on family life, and it cuts through class, race, culture, and geography, and it's all the more pernicious because it is so often concealed and so frequently goes unpunished, because it's so difficult for these victims to be able to speak up. As a result, in the Domestic Violence Amendment Act, there are certain obligations to report on functionaries in particular that has been included in that legislation as well, in Section 2, capital A, as well as 2, capital B. Please note these are not yet in operation, but I thought it is important to just mention it to everybody as well, so that they know that there are these obligations in terms of Domestic Violence Act as well, that will come into operation in the next couple of months. In Section 2, capital A, the obligation on functionaries would be, there is a definition of functionaries which include a medical practitioner, healthcare personnel, social worker, an official in the employ of a public health establishment, educator, or a caregiver, and any other person that may be designated in terms of this provision by the minister. The functionary, in the course of their performance of their duties or exercise of their functions, if they obtain information which after evaluation by them causes them to believe or suspect on reasonable grounds that a child, a person with a disability, or an older person may be a complainant, in other words, the victim of domestic violence, then they must, without delay, complete a report in the prescribed form, setting out the reasons for the belief or suspicion, and submit it to either a social worker or a member of the police. They must also conduct a risk assessment and may, after the evaluation of the risk assessment, provide or refer the complainant for further services. The functionary also who made such a report will not be held liable in civil, criminal, or disciplinary action on the basis of the report, and is also entitled to have their identity kept confidential. The duty to report in Section 2, capital B, provides for an obligation to report domestic violence and to provide information where any adult person knows, believes, or suspects on the reasonable grounds that an act of domestic violence has been committed against a child, a person with a disability, or an older person. And they have to report such knowledge, belief, or suspicion to a social worker or the South African Police Services. There will also be a prescribed form in order to make the report on, where you have to put in the reasons for your knowledge, belief, or suspicion and submit it then. Again, if you report in good faith, you cannot be held liable and you're entitled to have your identity kept confidential. However, failure to comply with the subsection, in other words, if you knew and you did not report, it can render you guilty of an offense. Though not specifically a duty to report, it is important to also note that in terms of the Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act, Act 4 of 2000, there is specifically a prohibition of unfair discrimination on the ground of gender, which specifically include as a form of unfair discrimination, gender-based violence in particular. Also in the Constitutional Court in the Minister of Home Affairs versus Fourie case, it was stated that a democratic, universalistic, caring, and aspirational egalitarian society embraces everyone and accepts people for who they are. And as part of all of this, as an embracing society and rights that is embracing, it is important for all of us to understand that we also do need to look out for each other and understand why people have difficulty reporting and what we can do to assist those that needs help but cannot or too afraid to ask or just don't know where to go to get help. There is a service charter for victims of crimes in South Africa, and a part of the objectives of the service charter is to eliminate secondary victimization in the criminal justice process. And as a victim of crime, persons do have the right to be treated with fairness, with respect for their dignity and privacy. They have the right to offer information and the right to receive information and protection, assistance, compensation and restitution where applicable. Just on a side note, I don't want to talk too much about it, but we will have another webinar on the 18th where the duties of employers to vet prospective employees, in particular in certain sectors, where they will have to work with vulnerable people. And this duties relates to the national registers. There are 3, the one on sexual offenders, the child protection register, as well as the one for the protection of older persons. And employers in general, if you work in a sector where people will be working with vulnerable persons, there is a duty to get a certificate from the registrar of these registers before such a person is employed. Prospective employees also have the duty to disclose whether or not they are on any such register. Like I said, there will be a full webinar on this duty to vet employees on the 18th, later this week. Just want to go back to what had been stated so many times, the fact that we have to stop turning the blind eye or the deaf ear. We have to listen and we have to act when need be, in particular to assist vulnerable people with reference to the definition as is provided for in the legislation. Thank you, Delia. That was what I wanted to share.
Thank you, Yaki, for that very comprehensive presentation. Who all are attending the webinar, Yaki needs no introduction, but in case there are any newcomers, I would just like to mention that Yaki has accomplished a number of accolades over the years. Her academic qualifications are as follows. She has a BA Honours in Afrikaans and Literary Theory, an advanced certificate in labor law, as well as a B Juris, B Proc, and LLB, which she acquired from the University of Pretoria. She has a certificate in constitutional litigation and completed an LLM at UNISA. And she has also done a Train the Trainer diploma from Damlin Management School. Yaki has been the Regional Court President for Limpopo Regional Division from October 2009 to date, and has been a regional magistrate since 2003. She started her career as a prosecutor and was an additional magistrate for 2 years before leaving to study further. While studying further, she worked at UNISA at the Department of Jurisprudence, at which time she became involved in training and the development of courses. She also was a lecturer at Justice College before she joined the Regional Court Bench, and still is involved in training and course development. She has been a board member at the Rules Board since 2012. She's a member of the South African Judicial Educational Institute and has been involved with various UNODC projects and publications, mainly on gender-based violence, including the Handbook for the Judiciary on GBV, as well as cyber violence. Last but not least, she has published various articles and was also co-editor of a book on the Promotion of Access to Information Act, i.e. the right to know. Right, so now that we know your whole pedigree, Yaki, for those who are newcomers to the webinar series, I'd like to open up the floor to anybody who would perhaps want to ask Yaki regarding any matter pertaining to the presentation.
Sorry, I couldn't raise my hand. Can't see where I'm supposed to be raising my hand. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, sure.
Okay.
Go ahead with your question.
Yeah, I just couldn't get it for, let's just say that the child is, you know that the child is dating a 32-year-old and perhaps they are 13, also failure to report, you'll be liable for criminal offense if you fail to report such.
Yaki, did you hear the question? Was it clear enough?
I'm not quite sure what exactly was the question. If it is, if you know about a sexual offense against the child, or if you know, for example, a child is being abused or neglected, there is a duty on us to report. And yes, a failure report if you knew about it and you didn't report can be, is a criminal offense, and you can be held criminally liable for the fact that you failed to report, especially if you're falling in one of the professions, the areas, the functionaries, etc., that is mentioned between the different acts as well. But there is a general duty on all of us as adults. If you know about a child that is being sexually abused, or sexual offenses committed against, or neglected, or is, domestic violence is being perpetrated against a child, then there is a duty on us to report.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, I'm answered. Thank you so much.
Right. Are there any other questions, or can we go ahead with Lebogang Moto's portion that she's prepared for this afternoon's webinar? Okay, right. If I can introduce our lovely Lebogang Moto. She has a BA in Child and Family Psychology and honors in Trauma Counseling and Afrocentric Psychology, and is currently doing a master's in Sexology. Lebo is the founder and CEO of Free World Initiative, which is a non-profit organization that is working together with communities to raise responsible men in hopes of eradicating gender-based violence and femicide in our lifetime. She's an author and contributor of My Fairly magazine, as well as a rape survivor, and dictates much of her time to healing other survivors of domestic and sexual violence. Welcome, Lebo. Go ahead and take the floor.
Thanks for having me. It's a difficult person to follow, but we'll do our best. Just a bit of my story. So the first time I was sexually assaulted was at age 6, where a family friend touched me and asked me to go to the other room because everyone else was sleeping. That was my first encounter with a male. And growing up repeatedly, which is normally what happens to rape survivors or victims, there are repeated offenses against them. So the first time was age 6. The second time was walking home from the park, where a group of men stopped me and told me to get in the car, and they wanted to rape me. Unfortunately enough, a passerby distracted them and I was able to get away. 2 years later, another family member touched me and told me that the person I would marry is older. He was in his 50s. I was 14 at the time. And then I was raped in 2019 by somebody I had known, and I had been taken to his place by a close personal friend, somebody I considered my mother, and he violated me in various forms. And when I came back into the room, I always find when they put up that sign of turn the radio down, very touching to me, because she had put up the volume and stood and sat close to the radio so that she would not hear me screaming and crying, and I asked him to stop. The subsequent year was horrific for me in terms of reporting the case, how the police officers dealt with it, how I was treated by the police officers, how the justice system handled the case. It was re-victimization in itself, just reporting the case, and how the police officers dealt with the situation. My case didn't see a day in court. The person I was with told them that she just took me to my boyfriend's house. My investigating officer said to me that she respected the guy who could last for an hour. The national prosecutor told me she cannot take my case because my screaming and shouting could be mistaken for screams of climaxing. That is what I went through, and that is what pushed me into the work that I did, because I promised myself no woman would ever feel as alone as I felt. I reported the case from the bottom all the way up. I reported the injustice. I reported the misdemeanor and misconduct that was happening with the police officers. And my case was just one more that was swept under the rug. My case is not unique. We live in South Africa that has been dubbed the rape capital of the world. 1 in 4 women will experience sexual assault. A woman is raped every 25 seconds, and 3 children are raped every minute in South Africa. These statistics, I just say them not because I'm just trying to throw numbers out, but it is something that people need to be aware that rape is a South African reality. 50% of children will be raped before the age of 18. And 85% of these victims are people that are known to them. So teaching our children about what used to be stranger danger no longer applies, because it is irrelevant if they are being raped by people that they know. And this is not only for children. Even in terms of adult victims, 82% of the rapes are people that are known to the victims. South Africa is facing a very difficult situation in terms of the femicide rates as well, where our statistics just keep going up, and the president has dubbed it a hyper epidemic. You know, it's not just a pandemic, but this is something that just keeps increasing with nothing changing. It seems that each time that we're putting an intervention in, these numbers are going up. And women are now asking, where are we safe? We're not safe at home. We're not safe in the workplace. We're not safe anywhere. Women are dying constantly. Our conviction rate is sitting under 9% right now in South Africa, which is sad. And it's also the reason why women are not reporting. Only 1 in 9 women are reporting their cases, and of these cases, only 9% are convicted. I'm seeing a hand up. Can we wait until the end, or should I take the hand as we go?
Lebo, I think we can wait till the end.
Fantastic. So this, I was excited when I was invited for this one, because accountability is a huge thing. Responsibility is normally put on the woman and on the girl child to keep herself safe. We are taught how to dress, how to act, how to behave, but no one is telling young men how to act. And it's not women who are raping women. It's not women who are beating women. It is men who are causing this violence towards women. So we do need to change the narrative, and that comes with accountability. Like I said earlier, 1 in 4 women is raped, but you can never find a man who says he knows a rapist. So this type of things need to change. We need to highlight the fact that this is happening. This is the norm in South Africa. It's a sad reality. And bringing it back, we are now talking about chemical castration, but that is not dealing with the root of the problem. We keep talking about preventative measures. We keep talking about curative measures. We keep talking about how to help the victim, how to support the victim, but not enough work is being done in terms of the preventative measures, which is now changing the mindset, which is now making each person accountable for the acts that they are partaking in. With the work that we work and we do support victims, but we do try and also work in communities to try and improve that situation where the toxic masculinity is eradicated. It is unfortunate for me to say that most of the victims who come to me are crying about the exact same thing. The police are not treating them with respect. Most times they're sent home when they're trying to report these cases at the police station. So when we talk about accountability, let's start off in the home. Like I said, the first person who touched me was a family friend. You know, it was somebody we considered a family member. We need to change the way we're socializing our young boys and young girls. From the home, we're already teaching the girl that if a boy pulls your hair, it's because he likes you. So from an early age, girls are socialized into believing that that violence or that ill treatment is indicative of somebody who is affectionate for you. So we need to start off at home in terms of how we are educating our children. That needs to be changed. Our communities. Often the rapist is the one who is sheltered and hidden in our community. Our communities welcome back the rapist, and the victim is the one who is made to have to prove that she is a victim instead of the perpetrator being called on. We often have the uncles who are allowed into our circles and into society, and the young girl is taught, don't dress that way because you know malume so and so will be here. That needs to be changed. Our educational system, we need to start teaching from young ages how to respect each other's bodies and what is correct and incorrect. That just the issue of love, learning that even if you're trying to show love, it needs to be accepted. Consent needs to start being taught at a very young age. Obviously, it needs to be age appropriate, but we need to start earlier so that we're not dealing with victims anymore, that we're changing the mindset. Law enforcement. I had the most horrific experience when I was talking to a whole colonel. He is the head of the Alexandra Child and Family Safety Unit. And he had the audacity to tell me that, Lebu, don't get involved in this matter. You don't know this person who is reporting. She's full of stories. Her story has not been proven. So if as a victim, I am going and I am reporting a case, and a whole colonel who you are reporting that, listen, your investigating officer is not doing her job, or the investigating officer is not doing what needs to be done, and you are reporting the case, and our law enforcement officials are still taking the side of the perpetrators, we will never see an increase in the reporting, number one, and we will never see an increase in our conviction rates, which we are needing for that the levels of rape can come down. We also need police stations to become more victim friendly. Often there isn't a private room where somebody can report the case. There isn't a child-friendly room. And as I said, most of the rapes are children who are reporting it. 68% of rapes that are being reported are children. And yet our police facilities are not child-friendly. When we go into the healthcare services, it is a very horrific experience of you having to sit there for 4 hours, 5 hours waiting for you to be attended. The whole procedure in itself is very intrusive, and then there isn't enough psychological support that comes with it. They will offer you one counseling service. In terms of the medication that you're given, there isn't anything for the numbing, the pain that the woman is feeling from this violation that happened to her. More needs to be put into that. The justice system. Unfortunately, most of the cases that are being reported don't even get to the prosecutor. The prosecutor rejects to take them because they say they are difficult to prove, because a rape is between two people. We need to make sure that women are believed. We need to eliminate this idea that women are liars and that these are false accusations, where 98% of these accusations are true, but they never see the light of day. Judicial system does also need to come on board. My heart broke and I was highly irritated and aggravated when I saw that our Minister of Police told one of the victims, the 8 victims from Krugersdorp, that she was lucky that she was only raped by one man. Politicians need to step up. They need to come on board. They need to also filter out this toxic masculinity that allows a whole minister to say something like that without any form of disciplinary action, without any penalties. That was wrong. That is teaching people that it is okay to be raped, and it's not. Never is it okay to be raped. Our media needs to stop normalizing rape. It needs to stop romanticizing rape. We often see scenes where a woman is coerced into having sex with somebody. Coercion is rape. So we need the media to also come on board and help us out in terms of talking about what rape is, talking about what consent is, talking about what gender-based violence is. We often normalize. We live in a country that has a history of violence, and we have normalized violence. Even in our own slogans as women, wathinta umfazi, wathinta umbokodo, pasopa uzokufa. You touch a woman, you touch a rock, be careful, you're going to die. We have normalized violence. And we are in a country where rape was used as a form of discipline when it came to the whites disciplining the black people, and it was never dealt with, and it became part of our fabric, that now it is just something that people use to correct sexuality, for example. We've heard of so many victims in the LGBTIQ sector who are correctional rape. So this has become a part of the tapestry, a part of who we are as South Africans, and we do need to deal with this. And most importantly, private sector. Private sector is losing 2 billion rand a year in terms of absenteeism and presenteeism that is related to gender-based violence. If they do not step up and say, we are here, we now want to first off, put money into the eradication of gender-based violence. Second off, say that this will not happen within our work environments. We find that the mining sector has got very high cases of gender-based violence. We find other sectors who also have high cases of gender-based violence, yet they are not coming on board to make sure that these cases are eradicated and eliminated. So in terms of the concept of accountability, what government has said is that everyone needs to be involved. So things like what we were talking about earlier of reporting cases. I love what the woman asked about a child, a 13-year-old child who is dating a 33-year-old child. Because of poverty, because of the need for money and the blessings, we've made this normal where it's not normal. This should be reported. This is a crime. We talk about teen pregnancies in schools where this is a crime. So accountability comes in each and every one seeing and stopping to turn this blind eye. We need to start talking about what is happening. We need to do these campaigns, broad, wide campaigns, so we do talk about the nitty-gritties of what rape is, the nitty-gritties of what domestic violence is, nitty-gritties of what abuse is, and then we can eliminate it from a preventative aspect instead of curative.
Thank you very much, Lebo, for that heart-rendering story of your personal experience. I think when we speak from personal experience and not just from a textbook, there's a much deeper insight and understanding of the phenomenon. And like you say, we definitely need a paradigm shift. I mean, as you mentioned, even with the blesser, I mean, even the word blesser is a good word. How can a 50-year-old bless a 13-year-old? You know, so definitely we need a paradigm shift.
I was teaching my children that language changes constantly, and we have taken things that are negative and not good, and now we make them seem beautiful. Having a blesser now is seen as something, it's an achievement when it's actually something quite filthy. How can a 50-year-old be looking at a 13-year-old as something sexual? So we do need to take back language and start giving the proper language to what is happening in society, which is moral degradation.
Absolutely, because that is basically rape, not being blessed at all.
It's not basically, it is rape, full stop, you're right.
Yes, thank you very, very much. Gregory, thank you for waiting. You can take the floor. I see your hand is up.
Okay, thank you. I think Labour's story is so heartening that I love to work with her on this one to show that I'm going to take my honest on you, Labour, that one, national standing orders is very clear. Any officer of the law who doesn't take your case, that will have to be charged punitively by SAPS as well. There's national instruction as well on this one. And then should that matter be investigated internally and it's going to punitive to be dealt with, then the matter has been referred then to IPAT as well. It goes further. The MS of safety in your area called community safety got a directive that can do section 107 of the Constitution as well, that where she can refer this matter to IPAT as a special investigation as well when it comes to it as well, that what is happening is totally unacceptable and it's not on anymore dealing with the matter as well. That, but we will have to take this thing up when we have the dialogue of the SAPS into the legislation processes and regulations and start talking about how do we deal with the issue you have just raised here today as well. That it also goes further as well. That should you be that you can prove a case that you're quite unhappy on the matter as well, that you can then with any pro bono lawyer then do it in a civil claim against SAPS as well. for neglect of duty in terms of your responsibility as a woman and as a person on the matter comes in as well there. Which bring me down to what I need to look into the matter as well there. We need to have a number of issues related to the labor cases. It's one of the cases, but I can tell a lot of thousand cases. It also says that we'll have to have a look at the pattern then of those cases being withdrawn on the same principle as well, that we believe that there's evidence in these cases, but because I am somebody, and let's take the latest one over the weekend on a Sunday Times of the Minister of Finance, the alleged actually issue of a wonderful service to someone who's doing massage as well, that the question that we are monitoring that case and see that how that case is going to happen, what's going to happen, the Minister of Finance as well, that will we also step aside or will the matter be investigated? But a point I want to raise here today is that we need to have a lot of this type of dialogues that where the labors of today must be part of the speakers on our dialogues to give the person perspective of the stories and see how we grasp these issues well that on the matter, how we look into the issue, what we call that this is a gender cry altogether. Because when I look into area now, your statistics are quite high. You got a high level of withdrawal cases for two levels. One, your cases are never investigated. Two, it is kept that it's never sent to FCS and becomes a big issue. The third aspect in your area is that you got a problem then what you call your sexual kits are never available, never expired. But to me that it's very heartening, Jackie. We'll have to have a look at labor case, honestly, the whole team, and see how we can assist them in this matter. Thanks.
Thank you, Gregory. Is there anybody else that would like to make a comment?
I can maybe jump in here from the start. Yeah, look, as a judicial officer, we're the last ones to know what is the history of a case and what happened with cases before it gets to us in the court eventually. And yes, unfortunately, all too often in the cases in the courts, we hear about the difficulty the victims have with reporting. And it's just not right. I think that is also why, at least with the efforts of the MPA, with the Tutuzela care centers and the fact that you can actually go straight there and not need to go to the police station first, also can make a difference. We had the webinar with the MPA talking about the extended services of the Tutuzela care centers, and maybe Lwando, for the people that have asked or given you their emails for now, maybe just send them also the list of the Tutuzela care centers with the latest list with the 61 on. So that, because it's also important for people to know how and where to contact the Tutuzela care centers. Unfortunately, they're not at all in all areas yet, but they are trying to expand. For me, the heartache had been cases such, I, for example, had one with a 12-year-old that was pregnant for the second time. She was raped by her father. And only when she was pregnant the second time, the first baby was apparently a stillborn. How that could happen, the baby be born, even if it's stillborn, and only when she was pregnant 6 months for the second time, did a teacher speak out. How can that be? You know, I mean, how can nobody? I mean, she was terrified to speak out, obviously. But the mere fact that nobody said anything, nobody that knew her, none of the teachers, nobody at where she was staying. I mean, how can nobody speak out? And that's just one of the million examples that is there, unfortunately, around. And we also very often with cases see, as you also mentioned, Lebo, the turning the blind eye, you know, putting the radio louder so as not to get involved. And that is part of the problem too. We should be helping. We should be raising the alarm. And we cannot continue to keep quiet. Not when we hear and see what is going on around us.
If I may, I was just going to jump in about the Tutuzela centers. Unfortunately, the president did say he was going to put in the 1.6 billion, I think it was, into the fight against GBV, but it is not trickling down to where it's needed most. The Tutuzela centers are far and often inaccessible to victims. The police officers, the police station has the obligation to transport victims, but that is not being done to and from to the hospital, to the courts. It's not being done. So all of these things that, yes, it's beautiful in paper. And that's one of the things I was going to say, that in terms of politicians, in terms of our laws, our constitution, we've got one of the most beautiful constitutions in the world. Anyone would love to live in South Africa, but in practice, it's not happening. My closest Tutuzela center, I think, is 12 kilometers away from me. So there is no way I can get there. It was easier to go to the police officers than to go to Tutuzela Center. And it's not just me. Most victims will let you know that they're unable to do that. But not only in terms of court appearances, all of the victims that I deal with are so exhausted of appearances after appearances, and nothing is happening. And you go there and bail is given. You know, one of the cases I'm dealing with, the one that I'm talking about, where Colonel Chauke told me not to listen to the report, is of a father who raped his daughter, and the investigating officer, he didn't appear in court, and they called him to find out, why didn't you come? So violations of bail is being are constantly being done. Gregory, I put my email address there as well, so we can communicate. I also put my phone number so that we can communicate, but because it's not the only case, I'm using her as an example because she gave me permission to talk about her case. My case is exactly the same thing, where they told me they're training the police officers for sensitization training. So I'm talking from a place of being there. So I understand when a victim comes to me and says, Lebo, I'm not getting joy with my police officer. I'm not getting joy. I know, because I went through it, but this is the norm. I was last week insulted by the colonel telling me, Lebo, stay out of this. So unfortunately, what we put, I've been attending every single webinar, and every time I say, I'm so happy where we are going in paper. And I just hope it will materialize in terms of acts now, because it's been going on for too long. And saying sorry, the president keeps saying sorry to these families. It's not enough. What's being done to make sure that these police officers, in my case, I reported the case. Even in this case, we've reported, we've tried to get the investigating officer investigated, mine included. On all my cases, I tell my victims, please keep a record of every single interaction you've had with the police officers. Please keep, we sent it up to the NPA. We have in my case, the perpetrator's cousin was a director at the NPA, and I highlighted this matter, that my case might not be taken up because of this, and it was just swept under the rug all the way up to presidency. And not every victim has this possibility of doing this. And after a year, I got exhausted, because every single time I got the same response. It's exhausting, it's tiring. Something needs to be done, and accountability, like you're saying, these men need to stand up and say no themselves, because women are fighting and shouting, but it cannot just be women in this fight. We do need men like Gregory to stand up with us and say it's enough now.
I can't but agree with you.
Can I
Gregory,
come in very quick?
do you have another question, Gregory? You're welcome to ask.
Okay. The responsibility of a station commander in terms of National Instruction 3/2008 on sexual offences is the following: that, Lebo, I'm going to read for you very quick, then you can know that you got a leg to stand on this matter as well with any station commander. Is that during the commission of a sexual offense, the victim has suffered severe trauma. It is difficult to conceive any other offense during the commission of which the body and psychological integrity, privacy, and dignity of victims simultaneously violated more several than during the commission of sexual offenses. What it simply means that the station commander got the responsibility then to provide transport for that person to be taken from point A to point B. There's one issue that you need to have a look at the matter, which a lot of people doesn't know that. So that's why all the vehicles of FCS are not marked, are very much unmarked for the same purposes as well. Then, so in every station commander, then once it become a pain to you, you can encode a national structure as well when it comes to it as well. That then the telephone reporting of sexual offense can also be done by yourself or by whoever to the station commander, where then he or she can give an instruction as well. That so it's very clear in the old national instruction where they need to be able to take responsibility for that as well. That if you get a type of treatment as well, that it's totally nonsense. They must then do what they're supposed to be doing in their responsibility as well when it comes to it as well. That the national structure was actually covered then to cover yourself and to cover a number of people as well. That another responsibility is that every station commissioner must liaise with the local representative of the Department of Health, including the representative of public health, externally refer, and that are within the station and in partnership development and the local community police forums and any other relevant local institution to identify local organizations which are willing and able to provide counseling and other support services, including medical services to the victims as well. That so it's an instruction which is there. And that instruction that is very clearly, categorically spelled out when it comes to that as well. That should that station commissioner not be doing that, then your organization must take a station commissioner on doing the matter as well. That you can go to Human Rights Commission on issue of it as well. That what we can maybe do here, Jackie, in the case of the labels, that it's where then the Equality Court comes also into place as well. That because we don't only use the Equality Courts for these matters. It's time that you can take on the matters and Equality Courts where punitive measure against these people needs to be dealt with, and that money being found guilty can be utilized for work of NGOs as well.
Thank you
Yes.
for the input, Gregory. Francesca, if I could just take the opportunity to thank you for arranging our panel for this afternoon. I see your hand is up.
Yes, thank you, Delia. I would like to come in here, and it is really pertinent that for South Africa, we really need to see something happening with our South African police services. And that said, I have met in my life some exquisitely professional officials, but I'm also dealing with a lot of people that are really putting our South African police services to shame. Currently, I'm dealing with a case in KwaZulu-Natal where a businesswoman has been victimized by a police officer, and he's harassing her because of his obsession with her. He's stalking this woman and he's making her life a living hell. And you have, and Lebo and I, we know each other, and we agree on this. We have so many instances where women approach the responders, whether it's SAPS, whether it's court, and we really need to get an overhaul. And we really, as a society, needs to get a value structure back in place, and we need our community-based organizations to stand firm and to demand, because ultimately anybody in public service is being paid by our taxes. And I'm sorry, I do not see why people who's got to contribute to the treasury of this country has got to suffer the suffrage that we do. It's just completely unacceptable. And it is time that people start joining forces, and that people that are integral, people that has got a solid value base, people that has morality, start taking charge of this country again, because it is apathy that has got us where we are. And I am so happy that this specific amendment has come into place, that puts the onus of responsibility literally at the door of every single person in this country. And that is what I am very, very positive about. Now it's time to start enforcing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca. Yes, I agree. And I
Also, like, thank you, because she's one of those that we constantly knock on her door and ask her for advice and ask how to. So she is very available to all of us, and we want to thank her for that. And what she's saying is absolutely right. It is on everyone's doorstep, so we can step up and change what's going on. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes, if I could just say, with regards to the new Amendment Act, there are many mothers who are aware, for instance, when incest is taking place, and like you say, they just put up the radio, put down the radio, or perhaps go shopping or whatever. Very often these incest victims do share what they're experiencing with someone else. And now we have a wide door open for these things to be addressed. So yes, the new act is just absolutely wonderful. Thank you. Tina, we still have ample time. Would you like to perhaps share with us? You said you had perhaps something earlier that if there was time.
Hello, yes, good afternoon. I'm Tina Tiart, and I'm from 1,000 Women Trust. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm very sorry to also add to all the stories of insufficient services. As you know, we work with grassroots groups. Many of the groups are informal, but it's women's groups who provide services and support to GBV victims in our communities. And they come with the same complaints, obviously, of police sending people away, especially on the West Coast. We've had lots of challenges with some of the smaller police stations where police would not take down the rape case or will not take down domestic violence reports, send them back to their homes and tell them to sort it out themselves. And also, for example, in the Karoo, if you want to go to a shelter in Beaufort West, you go report to the police, and the police will take you in a police van all the way to Laingsburg, which is 280 kilometers away. And as you know, the police don't have vehicles. Most of the vehicles are being driven by police chiefs who use it to go home. So those facilities, and that does not work. And we are trying our best to help shelters to come up. During 16 days, we had a lot of GBV events, for example, in Watville. We tried there in Gauteng, Ekurhuleni, to set up new groups who can support the women. And what we have discovered was that a lot of the very young girls being pregnant, the nurses would tell the parents and the mothers not to report. And we were under the belief that nurses have to report this, social workers have to step up. But it was not happening. We had a number of 10-year-olds, parents, who approached us because they did not know what to do, seeing that at the hospitals they did not get the support. And that's one of the things we are talking to the mothers, and we're encouraging them to report. But I really believe with this new accountability rules that the medical staff then also will be able to do their duty and to report. I mean, one of the nurses told us that it was the worst thing she's ever experienced. It's a young girl of 10 giving birth to a baby. And still, they did not report the case. We're talking about blessers, but we are talking also about influential people with money who pay 2,000 Rand to a mother to keep quiet, men in our society. So, yes, we are definitely, as 1,000 Women, going to work very hard to get all women to report and not to stop at the fact we've got about 6,000 GBV facilitators who help in the communities, and not to stop if the police don't want to take the reports, but rather to report into systems when it does not happen. I personally are trying to work with 2 more funders, whereby we can also track what happens to when people report. So on our app, people will be able to let us know every time when the police, the nurses, the social workers do not respond. We in the Western Cape had huge challenges with social workers who just ignored some of the cases, and on my investigation found that there are far too little social workers with far too many cases. And as you know, people have just reported about the courts. Maintenance are swallowing up every moment of social workers' lives. So when it comes to rape victims, when it comes to gender-based violence, it's not so serious. I have to do the maintenance. A mother must get money to feed her children. So hopefully now I've seen a lot of pressure on maintenance scores. That would also like relief, but definitely we have to speak to social development. There are too many social workers who are unemployed, who were sent on retirement too early to make place for the young people who were not appointed. So again, we have to look at the social work and the structures. And I'm also inviting whoever is a non-profit who want to work with us. Maybe we can get some money from EPW workers so that we can have more people who can support on the ground to make sure that the police station has got a trauma center being used and not the storeroom, and make sure that people, victims are being followed, and I hate that word victims, but survivors are being followed until they have the necessary services. So we have a webinar that we have presented to our members on this new changes, and we are really looking forward for that to absolutely come into place. There are still lots of gaps, and the service delivery is the gap, the biggest gap. And like everybody says, we've got these fantastic constitution, laws, legislation, but it is to the willingness to implement. Obviously, funding is a huge problem. I read that police got nearly R1 billion to train people, but I really believe if they've given it to us, and we have trained the policemen with the women in the communities, we would have seen a better result. But that's a different story, our police work. So yes, thank you very much for the opportunity. And I really want to invite all the women who would like to support us with a proposal to EPW workers to see this new IDT fund, to see if we can mobilize resources so that we have, instead of sweeping the streets, we can actually support victims of gender-based violence. Thank you.
Thank you, Tina. Yes, thumbs up for accountability and reporting these crimes. We should no longer be bystanders for these social evils that are around us. And yes, I think the way forward is definitely in the spirit of Ubuntu, where we honestly and sincerely care for one another. Francesca?
Hi,
sorry.
Yes,
you wanted to say something, sorry.
Yes. I really, from what Lebo has expressed, from what I experienced myself, and also from what Tina has reported on, in 2018, I said at one of our dialogues that women are their own worst enemies, and I'm still saying that today. And I want to express to every woman that is listening today, or any woman that would listen in the future, women must realize that it is our acceptance that normalize the kind of behavior that eventually result into gender-based violence and femicide. There's a very great historic case in the history of Europe where there were Grecian wars, and these wars carried on forever, and the women of the opposing sides came together and they decided that they want to put an end to the war, and they took certain actions, and it happens to be that they refused to have any intimate relations with the men on either side, and the war stopped within a week. You can go and research it. It's recorded history. My point is, in the construct of gender-based violence, if we as women hold our space, if we as women actually support each other, then we can change this. If you as a woman hold yourself accountable first, and your environment, your sisters, your brother, your nieces accountable, but start with yourself. Do you go to church with your children and walk out of church and gossip about somebody you saw in church? What does that say to your young son or your young daughter? It tells your young daughter that it's normal for her to grow up and possibly become the topic of gossip. It tells the young boy, my mother is a woman, she does not respect the other woman. So it starts with each and every one of us. How do we behave? How do our children, girl or boy child, grow up in their understanding, which they don't always express or question, of how we as grown women behave towards and about other women? What is our discourses? What is our value, our morality? Where are our expectations in our values if we cannot live those ourselves? I don't care if I don't like you, but if I see a man mistreat you, man, you will find a champion like you haven't known before. We all go through this. I have great understanding for every woman who has been abused in a marriage. I mean, we've all been there. Well, most of us have been there. And sometimes the subtleties that leads to these provocations actually starts within the construct of the thought patterns of sometimes very decent people. But it is in those moments where they behave unguarded, like that example that I told you. I've seen it so many times. People walking out of church and they start gossiping about somebody they saw in church. And I just thought to myself, gee whiz, where's your mind? It is just, we allow this trauma modeling, and especially when it comes to young boys that grows up without a specific positive role model. And now with that I mean it could be a divorced household or where the father is absent, but it could also mean where the father is present but is not a positive role model. So if we as the women can't hold our own and convey and leave some directive to these children of what values are and what morality is, and the consequentiality of our thoughts, our processes, and our actions, how do we expect the youth to grow up into the responsible, responsive, and gender responsive adults we want them to be. It starts with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca. Most certainly it does start with us. Although there's no blueprint for parenting, children inevitably dance the tune that their parents dance. So it's very important, how we set the example at home. So very often you would hear, this problem child at school. Well, it's not really so much as a problem child at school, but a problem home. So yes, I can't agree with you more. We need to really have an awareness and care for our youth, and keeping in mind that our youth is the next generation of leaders. So they need to be nurtured and taken care of. Right. Are there any other questions or any other comments? Anybody else? Is there anybody else that would like to say something, ask something?
Hi, Delia. Sort of linking back up to a comment that was made earlier about the mothers that know what is happening. Over the years, I had quite a number of cases where the mothers were co-accused because of the fact that they basically accomplices in the fact that they allowed it to happen. They knew about it, they didn't stop it. Or in certain instances where people were what we call accessories after the fact, because they heard about it and again didn't do or assist to by not reporting, etc. So these people that are aware that was regarded like the nurse that tell people don't report, etc. They are actually, it's not just about the duty to report and the fact that that is an offense not to report, but they actually, through doing that, became accessories to the crime itself as well. And I really think people need to understand how serious that is. And they can be charged. And we actually really need to make sure that they are being reported then as well. And that hopefully the prosecution will charge them too. Because we clearly need some examples that people need to understand how serious this is. We cannot stand by and close our eyes. Thank you.
Thank you, Yaki. Lebo, go ahead.
Just linking up with what they're saying, I think it has a lot to do with the fact that so many women are afraid to leave the home because they're dependent financially or in any way to the perpetrator, therefore they keep quiet. Can we work towards a society where we are removing the perpetrator instead of the victims who are working towards survivor? I'm just like Tina, who hates the word survivor, but I also teach my people that we do fluctuate between being a victim and a survivor. Can we work towards a society, and this is our call on civil society as well as private sector, so that we can move away from getting the victims out of the home and forcing the perpetrator to be removed from the home and letting the family be in their safe space instead of them having to find a place to stay. Shelters are unfortunately underfunded and often are not the best place to go, also in terms of the safety of the people, and most importantly, like I said, it's out of your comfort zone. You've already had to experience so much violence and now you're being removed. So a lot of mothers who will turn the blind eye because they don't know, they don't want to go into a shelter. So if we can in this platform work towards removing the perpetrator, they're the ones that did something wrong and they're the ones that need to be removed. And I know Francesca is going to back me up on this.
But before Francesca, I just want to add on to what Lebo was saying. And I think that is what is so important. It's not something we specifically spoke about today, but with the changes in the Criminal Procedure Act, through the Criminal and Related Matters Amendment Act. With bail applications now, where the victim has been in a domestic relationship with the perpetrator, and that would include where it's, for example, the child or the partner, etc. And it doesn't matter what the offense was, is any of the offenses, for example, the rape, the assault, the attempted murder, whatever. If the court decides to give bail, then the court must do the inquiry for a protection order if there's not yet a protection order. And for me, this was something that I fought also for getting into the legislation. It is something that at least 2 of our SADC countries, neighboring countries, have got already for a couple of years. Because a bail condition cannot deal with all of these other issues. That will make sure about, because in the protection order, you can make sure about who's staying where, about the rent being paid, about interim maintenance order so long, etc., which you can't do under bail conditions. So it is so important, and also to make sure that the victims understand that there is such an option, that should bail be considered, a protection order needs to be going with that as well, especially where there had not been a protection order before. And also now with the bail, one of the things that must be, they have to tell the court, not just about previous convictions, but also specifically as to whether or not there's any current interim or final protection orders against that perpetrator. And again, making sure that that information is given to the police when the case is opened is so important now as well. But it is important for everybody that is assisting, all the NGOs that is doing great work and assisting women, that they also know about this too, in order for them to be able to help them with these issues as well. To make sure that they are, that these protective measures that are in place, that it's being used, because that's the other issue. It must be used as well. And that includes the fact that witnesses can testify using audiovisual remote links like this. It is something that we should be encouraging to be used more. They don't need to come to the court building and be victimized and traumatized there. And I really believe that, in particular, our civil society can really assist a lot with that as well, and making sure people know their rights. Thank you.
Go ahead, Francesca.
Hi, can you hear me well?
We can hear you, yes.
Oh, good. I had to switch over to my phone. I would like to speak also to the fact, yes, I do agree. You know, I've been saying it for years. Why must the victims and, you know, women and their children be uprooted? Why not, you know, just remove the perpetrator from the home environment and allow the kids their normal school, and this woman to stay in her house and to, while she's adjusting and hopefully recovering a little. It is so unsettling to have to leave your home and, you know, to feel that insecurity and that trauma, and then to be traumatized by being alienating from the place you stay as well. But I want to speak towards Yaki, you know, with regards to accountability. You know, Yaki, I've been in courts with my ex since 2014, and it's still not ending. And all I want to tell you, and this is my question to you when it comes to accountability, you know, I've come across some magistrates that I was sitting there wondering, my God, you know, where's your brain cells? I'm honest. I'm not going to downtown it. I mean, it's like that, just the basic common sense, seeing through this guy and his legal representation, all their bull. It's as if it's not there. Of the postponement of after postponement with the same excuse. Hey, Don't you have notes on your freaking file? Don't you see these guys are playing the court? Don't you pick up on the lies and the distraction? And I mean, I make no bones about it. The first time I went to the gender-based violence court, it was probably 2015, yeah? No, 2014. And I was told, but I look fine. Why don't I go home and work on my marriage? By a magistrate here in Pretoria. Now, look, you know, I can wish the sod all kinds of ills, but that's not going to help me or women. There's got to be a reporting mechanism, and there's got to be accountability, because sometimes I wonder, are we having maybe the wrong people on the bench? Someone once said to me, advocates that were in the criminal justice environment become magistrates in the gender-based violence court, which deals with family law and these issues. How is it? How do we change this? Because that it's got to change, it's got to. And whilst there's breath in this body, I'm going to advocate for that change. So Yaki, please tell me, how do we keep the bench accountable? Thank you.
Yeah, look, there's always the option of appealing or reviewing of a matter if there was an irregularity or a mistake made by the presiding officer of some sort. The other option would be to, with the magistrates, you can lay a complaint with the Magistrates Commission. You may want to send the record along if you have it to show the insensitivity. Look, I'm in the regional court, so we just deal with the serious criminal cases and with divorces and things like that. Not with the domestic violence and the maintenance, and I know there's a lot of problems. At some of the courts, you know that they have been doing various interventions to try and improve the situation, but a lot of training is always needed. I've been doing a lot of training. We have that gender-based violence handbook for the judiciary, and I've been doing a lot of training. Unfortunately, not so much in South Africa, more for other countries, sadly, for various reasons. But it is something that also from SAJE being the training institution for judiciary, we are trying to make sure that more social context and understanding of gender-based violence training is being done in order to ensure that the magistrates understand the social context behind everything and have a better holistic approach. But at the end of the day, it's also about service delivery, isn't it? To the public, to the people that needs justice to be heard and seen and be done as well. But yes, we always need to improve. Can never say it's good enough, because it isn't.
Francesca, I had a very similar experience in the maintenance court. I spent 5 years, and by the time I got the 500 Rand extra, it was 5 years later, my children were then already out of school. My matter went 4 days on trial. I thought to myself, my goodness, where is the rule that the children's interest is of paramount importance? And my goodness, I'm here for maintenance. I'm not here on a murder incident. So I actually consider, especially mothers who are in need of maintenance, as also part of a vulnerable group. Right. Caiaphas, I see your hand is up. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Delia. I just want to make about 2 comments or so. The first one relates to issues about shelter. Now, as Lebogang was making a point, it just reminded me of one view that Advocate Kambule likes to raise in respect to the rights of victims. Now, we are all aware that, for instance, the Constitution has outlined specific rights that seek to protect the accused, the arrested, and stuff like that, or perpetrators or alleged perpetrators in general. But then there's some sort of silence in regard to specific rights of victims. Now, one issue that's being raised here, as I'm following, pertains to an issue about a person who moves from their home to elsewhere, to say that maybe where they move to, their rights may be compromised. And for me, it then suggests to me that maybe that is one critical area to say that if the situation remains as it is, that victims are moved into a shelter, perhaps we may need to look at specific rights that each shelter needs to provide so as to continue you know, to enable the person to exercise their constitutional right. Because as I hear it, for instance, Lebu indicated that where she left, the nearest shelter was about 12 kilometers away or whatever distance. So given the seriousness of violence in the country, one may then need to say, in the interest of the victim, to say, we need to ensure that certain specific rights must be standard in each shelter, so that when somebody goes there, at least we are sure that they are protected, or their way of living to some degree continues as normal. Because if one moves from a particular area and then where they go, the situation is worse, then it's actually bad. And that is unfair, because if you think about how perpetrators, or even those that get convicted, are protected when people are in correctional centers, for instance. You have things such as food, things such as education, and certain rights that are ensured for such people. So for me, we then need to make sure that perhaps identify specific rights that ought to be standard whenever, or how a shelter needs to be, because it seems to me that maybe the shelters that people go to are substandard to their rights. So I think that's one area we need to look into. And then secondly, relates to the issue about low conviction rates. I think it's a serious matter that as a country we need to pay attention to and look at all the factors that actually result into these low conviction rates, so that if there are certain bodies or institutions that are not doing their jobs, they are also held accountable. Gregory, for instance, indicated that if you were to go to a police station and a police officer does not serve you properly, you may actually take the matter forward insofar as that issue is concerned. We actually know about certain cases, for instance, where you know victims claimed certain damages from state institutions for omitting or even not doing what they're supposed to do. So those are some of the areas we need to be looking at. But for me, it's quite a serious concern to say We have very low convictions. So it's a matter we need to look at to understand the dynamics thereof. Because in other instances, it may be that if certain things were done properly, such convictions ought to have occurred. For instance, we have issues about DNA and many other issues. So for all of those need to be assessed so that where people need to be convicted are therefore convicted. Thank you.
Thank you, Caiphus. Gregory, go ahead.
I think Kim was quite clear on a number of key issues as well that, and maybe that's some way we need to have the type of virtual to look at the impact then on a current legislation on the terms of the conviction rate as well. That I think we're very fortunate that we are right about at the 80 to 85% processes of conviction rate in terms of sexual offences and maintenance cases as well in Northern Cape as well, and also femicide crimes as well, based on the investigators even drive up to Cape Town to go and make a point there. They must get a DNA result as well on the basis of that, which very few police officers are doing that. There's one way to look in the basis that how we can then improve that in conviction rate as well. That now the basis then of maintenance as well, that the result from our side is where I got a very good relationship on with the deputy head of maintenance in the Northern Cape. So what we normally do then, we look then in the basis that we give him directly a case, then himself then he's going to prosecute the cases. And he speed up the process because while even make it very clear, at least there's only two debtors which are very critical in terms of maintenance. One, debtor number one will always be your taxes. And debtor number two will be your child as well. And as long as that is within the 90% bracket of payment of a total salary basis, that you're within the line of payment as well when it comes as well. So basically that women can claim up to 90% of total salary then of basis then of payment in terms of maintenance when it comes that as well. That now the effect of it as well, that what is happening, there's a technicality which men normally wants to resign. We love when men want to resign, and what do you do then? We try to get a court order on the matter, and then we also ask for an amendment order that we call a future maintenance attachment order as well. That it simply means that if you say you're going to get a pension, that pension is going to be attached to you as well there for future maintenance. And there's one of the issues that maybe should be known that women doesn't know about the issue of future maintenance. Maybe we also need, Jackie, maybe from your side, we should have a virtual, I don't know, maybe around September that what will the impact be of the current legislation, because the domestic violence will have definite impact on maintenance. And there's a way we'll have to have how do you balance the two? Because my fear is that a lot may have to have a base of the issue of the court orders and started using the basis then of saying that I'm not going to pay maintenance. One way or another, there's going to be impact. One is going to suffer. So maybe they have to have a dialogue then in terms of the impact of maintenance against the DBA as well, the Amendment X, and bring the maintenance guys on board to start having this basis that how do you have a dialogue on this basis there to have the issue as well. The same way as the speeding now of return of service is going to happen very quick on the domestic violence cases, but we may have an effect now on the return of service on the summons then when it comes in the basis then of the maintenance officers as well, that how they need to do their jobs. There's a lot of investigators not doing anything. Maybe a dialogue like that, Jackie, we need to have a look at around September and see that all 16 days, how do we get such a webinar where we bring then the maintenance officer on board, the head of maintenance together, and the DBA team together, and the police as well, and see that what will be the impact in base and how do we get rationalization of that nothing should suffer in the base of it as well.
Thank you. Yes, Gregory. There's probably a lot more conversations that is needed that we can deal with in terms of the webinar. And I'm definitely going to put that one down as well. Yes, and a lot of this is about potential interventions that we can have, in particular at the maintenance courts with the high outstanding numbers of maintenance cases and the cases that has been long backlog, like the 100-day challenge, the Pillar 3 group did in Bloemfontein, where they managed to get the backlog down by 75% in 50 days with the special intervention. And I do think that is maybe something that we need to call for, that needs to be rolled out to do similar interventions particularly in respect of maintenance, because yes, it is something that cannot wait 4 years, 5 years to get resolved. As you said, Delia, then it means nothing anymore. It is a bigger issue. And coming back to the bigger economic impact on that GBV also have on society at large. It's not just the mother and the children. It is a much bigger issue as well. Thank you. And just one of the reasons when I started off, I said we need to remind ourselves of the rights in the Bill of Rights. Because yes, the accused does have certain rights. But remember, all the other rights in the Bill of Rights is the rights that is there for everybody, including the victims or survivors of crime. And there is the service charter that sometimes seem to be ignored way too much, and we need to talk more about it and make sure that it is something that is being adhered to by all the role players within the system as well. Oh, yes, I see you throw the numbers out there, Gregory. The numbers of the impact of GBV is horrendous, which, by the way, we are going to have a webinar on the economic impact of GBV during the course of the month as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Yaki. Is there anybody else that has a comment?
Hi, yes, Delia. Sorry, I can't raise my hand, so I'll just come in.
Go ahead.
When we look specifically, about accountability and maintenance, it gets back to the point that I was making earlier, that each and every individual and official in this country needs to be responsible. I can sympathize with you and your maintenance case because it took me 5 years. But also, there was a time when you would show up at court and your file is just misplaced again. And then one day, I don't know how I managed, but I just decided I've had enough, and I ended up at the office of the chief magistrate of the Pretoria court. And I had a little cadenza, and I was really very upset. I mean, it's been years going on. And he said to me, sit right here in my office. And he went downstairs, and I don't know what he did, but I could hear him. He was in a, on a bit of a steamer going on downstairs. 20 minutes later, he walked back into his own office with my folder, my cases folder in his hands. Now, obviously, it shows that we all know that some of these opposing attorneys use their influence to have some of the court officials misplace files and folders. All this nonsense has got to stop. Women cannot keep on carrying the brunt of failed relationships. Yes, we are also part of that relationship, sure. And I'm quite sure we all have some play into the failure, but why it failed is not the thing. The fact of the matter is relationships fail, and then we need not only political but judicial maturity, and maturity in terms of who we are as a collective in this country, so that we recognize life change, things change, and that we deal with it in the most responsible way possible. Very often men, when a woman divorces them, wants to do not only hate on her, but also divorce his children. It is such an immature and fallible state of mind that it is really, that is why South Africa is a struggling society. We are living in one of the greatest countries in the world. We've got a wonderful, diverse ethnicity in South Africa. It should play to our strength as a country. everything we are should play at our strengths. But when we are allowing immaturity and spite and malice to rule and overcome our morality, that is when the problems start. And that is why I'm wanting to see accountability from the president straight through to everybody on the ground. It is absolutely what is required when we've got to fix this country. And that is what I want to end my day with. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Francesca. Yeah, in my situation, actually, coincidentally, 10 years ago, I was so disheartened after my case. I actually made an appointment with Advocate Kambula 10 years ago. I can't believe the time has flown. So I didn't follow it up because I just got busy with a PhD. But my point was, women applying for maintenance are really a vulnerable group. You really need to pay the school fees and that. And so the big problem I had at the time was so much perjury. I think the case took so long over days because of the perjury, even blatant perjury. When the ex-husband, who's now passed over, says he's put 8,000 towards the university fees, and you've got a print out and you say, where did you pay the 8,000? You know, it's blatant lies. And the investigating or the magistrate, it just says nothing, doesn't address the perjury. So I think, I know with our Domestic Violence Act, luckily Karen did say, you know, with false allegations, the forms in the new act, you know, false allegations, perjury is being taken seriously and there will be prosecution. And I think in our maintenance court, if perjury was taken also more seriously, things would also be wrapped up quicker and more effectively. Anybody else want to have a final comment? We've got 10 minutes to go before we end this webinar.
I can continue there, Delia, if you would allow me, and Yaki knows this very well. I'm a great advocate and activist for systems in other countries. For instance, in Argentina, if you're none of this dragging a divorce out to, you know, impoverish a woman and so that she can pay these excessive legal fees, there, if you're not divorced within 6 months, you cannot work with mediation. The state sends somebody in and they just, that person doesn't care about you or your ex, he just simply divides the assets. So they make sure that they get divorced quite well. In Germany, the German government has placed a restriction on scales on the fees of attorneys and also a time limit. So also that stops attorneys from charging people who can't afford excessive fees excessively, and the time limit works in place. So if you are divorcing a multimillionaire, there's a scale, but you know your time is money. So the faster you get the mediation done and sorted, you actually as an attorney benefits. And it's the same with anything else. In the Netherlands, and this is the model that I love, when you go to a divorce, the magistrate that manages your divorce is the same one that will attend to the family court aspect with regards to the children. It's the same one that will attend to the maintenance. What that does, it prevents this excessive perjury. It prevents a person and his legal representation to distort and convert and delay and to you know, just play their silly freaking games. And it just gives one person of authority the insight from A to Z, so that this play and this taxing of women and their resources is mightily controlled. And that is what I would like to see. But for that, we need to have a central system that is operable.
What a good policy to cap the fees. Recently, I had a client who was part of my intervention. She's getting divorced and the settlement is not even agreed upon. It's not even finalized, the settlement. And her fees were already 60,000 Rand. Now, who has 60,000 Rand lying around? Lebo, I think we can take one last comment.
Yeah, can I just comment your comment, please, quickly, Delia?
Sure.
You know, if you take, you know, the maintenance lag over 4 or 5 years and you having to carry legal representation, at the end of the day, you get your maintenance, and this is arrears, you get your sum awarded to you. But when you deduct the time and the legal fees that you had to pay in the meantime, you're lucky if you get a third of what you've actually spent back. It's absolutely ridiculous what they allow here. Absolutely ridiculous.
So true. Go ahead, Lebo.
I just wanted to put my 2 seconds and say that I think what Francesca is saying and has been saying is absolutely true, and it links up to the fact that accountability is not an option. We do need to make judicial system accountable for things like that, delaying the process of maintenance, which is it is financial abuse in itself. The family members who are siding with perpetrators also need to be held accountable and be brought to par that if you do not report something that you know that is happening, they are held accountable. All of this will lead towards women being uplifted and women's rights being adhered to. I love what Francesca keeps saying, that as women, we need to stand together, but not just women. We need to bring the men in as well. And all of it is a fact. If we are not all accountable for what is happening in South Africa, if we're all turning a blind eye towards gender-based violence and femicide, nothing is going to happen. So accountability is not an option for anyone.
Thank you, Lebo. Yes, violence in our homes and in our communities is a complex problem. And I think as far as reporting is also just as complex, because at the end of the day, our children have a loyalty towards parents, so it can become quite difficult for them to report. So I'm just thinking perhaps in our school curriculum, we should include in life studies, perhaps, you know, setting boundaries for there to be an awareness of what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. So I would like to thank you very much, Yaki, for a very informative presentation. And Lebo and Tina, thank you very much for your time, for spending this afternoon with us. Thank you for your expertise. And everyone else that participated, thank you very much for your input. And yes, so I think that kind of brings our webinar to a close. We are ending 2 minutes earlier, if that's fine. It's a pleasure, Lebo. It was wonderful having you on board.
I just want to say thank you, Delia, for moderating, and thank you very much for Lebo and Tina that had also participated, as well as everybody that have made comments and just, you know, participate in this discussion. And I saw somebody was referring to that information about the webinar, or the webinar should be out there. Luanda will get the, it is recorded. Luanda will get the recording through to the Meet Communication people, and it will be put up on YouTube on a future date, in which case Luanda will make sure, I'm sure we will ask him to make sure that he sent you the YouTube link as well, if you would like to share that, and he will send you the material as well. So thank you, Luanda, for all the admin as well. And to everybody, have a great afternoon further. And there are webinars on the 16th, the 17th, and the 18th as well. If you would like the links and you did not get it, please contact Luanda as well. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a super duper week.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
Ciao, ciao.
Thank you. Bye-bye.